Discover Mongolia Forum 2018 Minerals and Mining Business Summit.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity from the organisers of this very well curated conference, and it's great to see so many interested participants. It means, I think as Hedley mentioned, maybe the clock has turned and maybe we're turning into the start of the boom. I'm going to talk about Abut, which is our primary discovery, a secondary discovery called Nursty, in the context of what it might mean for northern Mongolia contributing to the coal story in Mongolia, and also the infrastructure required to make that all happen. So a number of disclaimers. We've recently, as of last week, announced a major new corporate transaction, and I'll explain that a bit further. But through that corporate transaction, we've introduced a major new Mongolian shareholder who will be my largest shareholder, Mr.David, who many of you would know, a very successful Mongolian businessman, an ultra-high net worth, and someone who saw enormous value in what we have here in Mongolia. So at the moment we've got a market cap of around $60 million. We have cash about 7.5 and a small amount of debt. With this transaction, which is due to be approved at a shareholders meeting at the end of October, we'll have something in the order of about $18 million in cash in Australian dollar terms, no debt, 3 projects, and a new early development story for Abut. So we are really transformed and really energised as of now. Very important, can't emphasise enough. We've always had a significant Mongolian ownership. We are now 1/3 Mongolian. So 1/3 of our issued capital through an ASX listed company is owned by Mongolian nationals. And I think that's an incredible achievement, and just shows how aligned we are with Mongolia. All my assets are in Mongolia. Every dollar I've raised has gone into this country, and we're following through. We have a board, 7 directors, 3 of which are Mongolian. The financing I talked about, which we announced last week, it's $15 million, clears debt. Mr. David puts in $10 million directly, and we raised another $2.1 million on Monday. So what I guess I'm saying here is that in the Australian context, ASX context, there is a significant amount of support for Mongolia, particularly when they see Mongolians participating. We have 3 assets. The Abut coking coal asset, which will be the focus more of my presentation. The Nursty coking coal project, which is a lot smaller, but an extraordinary quality coal for coking coal. And then Northern Railways, which is essential to tie it all together, and a great legacy project that the resources here that we've identified can leave the country in terms of a whole new service industry for transport, and knock-on benefits for agriculture, tourism, etc. So quickly for the Abut coking coal project. Looks like the prices haven't come up there, but the Abut coking coal project is a 247 million tonne open pit reserve identified through drilling and a discovery we made between 2010 and 2013. It's up to pre-feasibility study level. We identified we could produce up to 10 million tonne per annum of washed fat coking coal at a cost base which is in the 2nd quartile globally on a DAP China basis. So it's a very large project. What's happened since, unfortunately, the prices tend to come up here, but the fat coal and hard coking coal prices have actually stabilised over the last 18 months. At the Coal Mongolia conference yesterday, Wood Mackenzie mentioned that they see a tightening in the supply, not dramatic, but certainly tightening in supply due to a lack of capital investment over the years, which should see prices being stable and slightly on the up over the next few years. And that's really the context in which we're making our investments. With Abut, we have a mining licence, which we got in August 2012. The reserve is actually the 2nd largest reserve of an asset in the country. Obviously, Taban Tolgoi is several multiples larger than us, but it does show the importance and the scale of the asset we found in the north. The other point to note is that 70% of the resources that sit behind the deposit is in the measured category in a JORC compliance. So this is a very well understood deposit. It's well drilled out. It's at feasibility study level in relation to the resource. To properly maximise, to deliver 10 million tonnes per annum, you can't do it by road, you have to do it by rail. And I'll talk about the rail project because it's a very important part of the factor. However, in the process of doing the rail project, we identified that a road connection along the same path as the railway could be instrumental in starting the project early, pre-rail. And we call that project the Early Development Project. And that's certainly something we're now going to be focusing on. It's something that Mr. David himself also identified, and we're in complete alignment on that. So essentially, it's following the rail path from Evoot, washing the coal at site, trucking the coal along the rail path, while rail is completed. Much of the permitting, the environmental agreements, etc., are all the same, whether it's rail or road, and certainly be a joint collaboration to achieve these. As the rail is further developed along the path, you end up being able to have a shortened trucking path, eventually rail connecting all the way to Evoot. The capacity on the road is really limited by other infrastructure capacity within Mongolia, and we believe there's a window of 3 to 4 million tonne per annum, which we will now design the early development of Evoot around. We've also secured an option over a terminal, which we will create at Erdnet, which will be able to be our initial point to which to load onto rail. Another thing, and I can't emphasise this enough, another thing which was mentioned by the Wood Mackenzie analyst at the Coal Mongolia conference is the great ability of Mongolian coals to be blended to improve value. It's something we haven't considered before as an industry. It's something that needs infrastructure to be able to find places to do the blending. But he actually used the Evoot coke and coal project and coal as a great example. So a few years ago we actually did some blind blending tests with Tavantoloy's thermal coal, oxidised coal. So it's not coking, and we're able to show that on a ratio of 2 to 1 we can move this thermal coal into a semi-hard coking coal to hard coking coal category. That is the value of being able to blend. It's a very, very big value uplift, but there's also other value uplifts in managing phosphorus, sulphur and other impurities. That's a huge value addition which can happen, and Mongolia's role, Northern Mongolia's role in this is really to supply the sort of coal we have here at Evoot and our neighbour at Mongolia to be able to do such blending activities. Better to do it in Mongolia, achieve the extra value in Mongolia than have customers in Russia and China doing the same thing. Once trucked or rail to Erdnet, there's now been a very important development which happened a few months ago. You may not have been aware of it, but after 9 years of negotiations, the Russian-Mongolian governments agreed a discounted tariff structure through the Russian rail system, particularly out through to Far East ports. The Far East Economic Forum is being held next week, and President Petulga will be meeting President Putin, and they will be discussing this and other matters to encourage Mongolian exports through Russia. For us, being in the north of the country, we are ideally located to take advantage of this, and this is certainly in our strategic thinking going forward. We see ourselves as a multi-customer project, and not just to the south. And that's another, I guess, benefit of Northern Mongolia's contribution to the coal industry in Mongolia. We really do see ourselves as having alternative customers. This map, I think, speaks for itself. All those little blue dots are steel mills. And what you see in this little part of the world, where Mongolia is the central part, is 65% of the entire steel-making industry in the world. It's all here. Mongolia is extremely well located. You just got to join the dots in terms of rail infrastructure, and these are all markets available to us. So, Northern Mongolia's role as a supplier of coke and coal is about Avut because it's a very large asset. Our neighbour Mongolia is a significant asset with very similar properties to Avut. And we have the Nersti project, which is a little bit different in terms of coal. It's a higher rank and is a traditional ultra-hard coking coal. Through these supplies, we can both obviously be direct suppliers of coking coal to that global market and be a blending partner to improve coals throughout the country. So we see our ability to export north, south, and even through the Russian rail system out through to the east. The Black Sea ports, Turkey, Eastern Europe are all possible and available. We have two products out of the north of the country. We have a fat coking coal project, fat coking coal from Aspire Avut project, and Mogan Gold, which is listed on the Mongolian Stock Exchange for their Mogan Gold project. Those coals, what they supply is fluidity and caking properties as well as coking properties. So that's actually something which is in strong demand. One of the reasons, and back was on the price graph that we had, the fat coking coal prices in China are actually now above hard coking coal prices. There is a tightness in that market, and it's being driven by a general decline, slow but steady decline in the quality of Chinese coking coals, and the removal of some suppliers of high fluidity coals out of Australia. So this is a terrific time for us to be progressing an early development of Avut. And then we have the prime hard coking coal from Nersti. And just as an aside, we sent a bulk sample of that to Australia, and they tested it 3 times because the results were so good they just weren't sure what they were, but they were confirmed 3 times. It's outstanding. So in terms of infrastructure, we're initially road-based and then rail-based. And because with rail, we'll certainly be globally cost competitive. So Northern Mongolia, based on these resources, we think can supply 20 to 30% of the entire exports of Mongolian coking coals in the future. So looking back here now, the early development of Avut through trucking, there's multiple strategic benefits available to us if we can commence road-based delivery of Avut coal. That's certainly something we're now going to be investigating. It obviously reduces marketing risk pre-rail, and we can secure large volume markets and customers pre-rail. It will also improve Aspire's ability to fund construction through equity investment in Northern Railways itself. Clearly it makes the bankability of the rail project that much better by being able to be in business as that progresses. And of course, from a shareholder point of view, it brings forward significant production cash flow for the company, which as a developer is essential for longevity. Obviously, I can't emphasise enough the importance of having major Mongolian investment in us. The new major Mongolian shareholder, I think, definitely de-risks the project and project execution, and we certainly welcome his very strong support. The other thing which I want to describe is, we're a relatively small ASX company. Our market cap's around $60 million. With this transaction we announced last week, we'll probably got $75 million at the share price, at the same share price. That is not satisfactory in my view. We talk about Mongolian discounts for assets. In the coking coal context, there was a transaction happened just last week for an asset just near Calgary in Canada. An asset which was similar to, in scale and size as Avut. It's an unlisted asset, but the transaction they did valued it at $500 million, $500 million, and I'm at 60. That's unacceptable. It needs to be dealt with, and that's something we'll be certainly progressing hard over the next 6 months or so. Well, even though we're a small Australian company, we have big partners, and certainly with rail, we have a consortium that comprises China Railways Construction Corp and China Gazuba Group, 2 large Chinese SOE constructors, who are motivated as participants in the Northern Railway and the Northern Rail Corridor, which is an asset which will live long past decades after the Avut coal resource has been mined and paid for it. So thank you for your time, and we have a booth, so please come and have a chat about that. as we progress the early development project. Thank you.
Discover Mongolia Forum 2018 Minerals and Mining Business Summit.